Well, thanks for joining so early.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Excited to chat with you.
Uh,
Yeah, don't you say good afternoon at 5 o'clock in the UK?
you
You
do.
don't say good
Yeah.
evening yet?
No, good
Yeah.
afternoon, good evening, and thank you very much. Yeah, yeah. So you're in Seattle. Is that Seattle Seahawks? I know nothing about American football. Forgive me.
Yeah,
But there you
Seattle
go.
Seahawks right here. My pride and joy. Also a point of my of deep agony and heartbreak a lot of times too. But uh, yeah, Seattle Seahawks. That's our American football team.
Well, first of all, look, thanks for joining. It's been a long time since I've done one, so I feel quite rusty and nervous. So, as ever with
Oh,
this stuff, we always just we start off, then we meander, and it's just a conversation, really. And I always try and look back on people's careers. I always find it interesting in how you got to where you are. What was the spark? What was the inspiration? How you became a designer. So, if we could jump in there, Tyler, that would be really good.
yeah, I'd love to reminisce.
Yes.
Yeah, my path to I guess where I am at the moment was pretty indirect, as I think it probably is for, a lot of people.
Mhm.
Um, I was a kid that grew up with a very big thinking, creative mind that didn't know what to do with it. My parents didn't know what to do with it. My teachers didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
Um, so therefore I didn't know what to do with it, of course. Um, and I made my way through school, ended up at university semi begrudgingly. I wasn't really eager to jump back into school after high school. But I ended up doing it mainly to get out of my hometown, and go on a little adventure. But I spent most of my time creatively playing music. I loved history, so when I got to school or university, I was considering, studying history as a primary. Studying music, that wasn't quite for me either. Both are very obtuse, and music in particular, although that was a huge passion, I spent so much time, which is going to segue me into graphic design here in a
Yeah,
sec.
yeah.
It was so formulaic, and um, it took a lot of the creativity out of it. When I started really learning theory, I was like, I almost don't want to know. I just want to
Yeah.
experiment.
I was going to say, what did you learn? What instrument was it? Piano or something? What
Well, I
theory?
mean, we're definitely on piano a lot in the beginnings when you're diving into the core of music theory.
Mhm.
Everything can be
Absolutely.
centered around the piano, and so we spent a lot of time there. And I didn't particularly love playing the piano, and I didn't love unpacking every detail of theory, and it started to change the way that I thought creatively. Like I was looking to try and seem intellectual in music as opposed to projecting
Mhm.
my emotion or feeling into something that I was producing
Yeah.
and or writing. So I started doing that for fun, and I dropped out of the music program. I was in a band for which we will not name,
Oh.
um, and played music for a while, which was a great time. But what that did is it segued me into this world of cover art and poster design, and playing with type and layout and studying you know all the, especially in Seattle, the the album art and the poster scene and everything kind of tied in and around music is very present. And while I never really did that professionally, I did it as a means of just fun.
Yeah. Mhm.
It kind of opened my mind up to the fact that, oh, I can commercialize this creative outlet that I like to make things. Um, and poster art obviously has a function, but it's also just art. It's a little more expressive. So at that point, while I was in school, I ended up in the visual communication program. I had a friend who was in it, and another good friend who was in a different program at a much better school for this type of study. And yeah, I just kind of fell in love with it. It was a combination of creativity and strategic kind of business goals. There was a commercial aspect to it, and my big, idea brain loves to think entrepreneurially and think about those things, even though I won't, just like with music, rather than solving all the nuts and bolts I want to think about the idea,
Mhm.
um, and tell a story. And I found that commercial art and graphic design and eventually developing brands was a really interesting way of overlapping all of those things that I kind of naturally was gravitating towards. So I feel like I fell backwards into it and feel very fortunate actually, um, because I was really unsure what I wanted to do and what I was really good at, and um, yeah, that's how I ended up in it. I was fortunate to get a good job out of school, and it was just sort
Right.
of like onward from there.
Yeah. And in Seattle, it was quite a big grunge, wasn't that the home of the grunge, the Pearl Jams
Yeah.
and stuff, right? So with
Oh
that,
yeah, the
so
Pearl Jams, the
here we go.
Nirvana. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm trying to think back to, were you designing posters around the time when that kind of kicked off? So was it quite rough and ready? I'm trying to think of the aesthetic that
Um,
might
yeah,
have
it
had,
was it was it was after that.
right?
It was actually an aesthetic of that world that I think we all feel is aging poorly at this point, from the
Mhm.
the early 2000s to 2000, pre 2010, like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
aughts. And there was a lot of things people were experimenting with that, especially, I don't know how it was in the UK or in Europe as much. But yeah, it was kind of an odd time. So I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's not like I look back at that period and think, "Oh man, I was so proud of the work that I did for my friends' bands or for my band or something."
Yes.
Um, but I do see it. I think back on it very fondly because it was a time of no responsibility, just kind of experimentation, learning tools, learning things. And even when I was in school, I was able to I was able to learn a lot from close friends that were in significantly better programs than mine.
Right.
Because I didn't go into it with the intent of seeking out graphic design or visual communication. So I ended up in a program that was fine, but it wasn't the best. But being able to piggyback off of their education also was a benefit, um,
Yeah.
for me as well.
And who were the sort of influences for you graphically or
Mm,
within art around that time, Seattle based, or was it
that's
more
a yeah,
American or more European?
yeah.
Was it?
Really, was always so fond of, uh, especially at that time, everything that Apple was doing, which was by way of everything that Dieter Rams had done.
Yeah,
And I found my way kind of moving my way down that, and was really keen on understanding why very simple things worked and communicated, viscerally as well as they did. That was a really big point of inspiration where, I think at that age, growing and learning about graphic design, a lot of younger designers and students, their minds were set in what kind of cool technical thing can I achieve? What can I do that feels weird and experimental? And there's a place for that. Um, but I feel I feel lucky that I was drawn towards that type of design because it led me down, I think, a little bit more of a stronger foundation for the fundamentals,
yeah,
which I wasn't necessarily getting in my education. So I think that, and then I spent a lot of time. I'm really into film as well, and I took a motion design class, and
okay,
all those old Saul Bass title
yeah,
sequences that were manually animated and very graphic in nature. I thought were so cool because it took a lot of the simplicity that I loved about what Dioram's had really projected into the world and put it to motion in a more kind of whimsical and uh, sometimes silly way. And I loved experimenting with that too at that age. So yeah, I think I would say those are pivotal. Those are pivotal influences,
yeah.
and nothing, you know, too
And
monumental, I suppose, in that realm.
so, what age would that be when you were sort of experimenting? Early 20s or something?
Oh yeah, I mean, early 20s. Yeah, I'm talking 21, 22. About the time I would be exiting school, just distracted by hanging out with friends and girls and everything else aside from work. I had to like really focus my attention. And that last year was yeah, when I think it really clicked for me, and when I really landed on what made it interesting to me, which I think is, you know, a balance of functionality and creativity that really solves a business problem.
Yeah.
Was cool, you know, and I that's kind of what I ended up sticking with.
Nice. And
Yeah.
tell me about the Parker studio that
Yeah, I mean,
as a
so
background.
yeah, I, you know, I founded Parker originally with my wife actually
Right.
in 2018, um, end of 2018. So we got 1 year in before the pandemic. So it was a great time to start a business. You know, we originally started the office together because at the time she was doing commercial interior design. And, you know, I really enjoyed some of the branding work I'd done in the past with hospitality clientele. It felt very reminiscent of music. It was a little more expressive. There was not as much user research or A/B testing. It was a lot more about feeling and expression and
Yeah.
getting
The
to know a
emotion.
chef
Yeah.
or a pastry chef. Yeah, there's more emotion involved, and it was fun to bring physical spaces to life. And so we thought together, hey, why don't we just work on these types of experiences together? So yeah, we did that for the first year. And then when the pandemic sort of stopped everything, you know, sadly, a few of the places that we have had put so much time and energy and effort into ended up shuttering or ended up pivoting or selling. You know, a lot of people were trying to figure out what they were going to do through there and physical locations, and
Yes.
the traditional hospitality model was very much this was one of the most disrupted industry. And so I pivoted the studio at that point. You know, we had just had our second child together, and it was kind of a natural moment of
Hmm.
transition. And so when I came out of 2020, um, really wanted to rebuild the studio around, you know, pretty broad stroke net new brand development and um, graphic design. And we took the interior component out of it, you know, brought in some more strategy, and ended up working, you know, more with, you know, B2C, D2C clients. Um, and it was the right transition to make, especially at that time. It definitely narrowed the focus and brought us into like a chapter of growth, which was fun. But yeah, we're, you know, the high level is, you know, we're a small studio. We're here in Seattle. We've got one down in LA. It's a great size. It's a close team. We're very, you know, committed and you know, we have a lot of conviction in the work that we do together, and we share that responsibility and passion for the work. So it has its highs and lows naturally.
Yes.
Um,
I'm just
so
on
yeah,
this.
that's what we've been doing. Yeah, for a
Yeah.
few years.
I'm just on the site looking at your studio's stunning. I've got studio envy.
Oh
It's
man,
like oh,
yeah.
that's so nice. Just the wood and everything looks so warm, and the brick and everything else like that. So is that sort of like central in Seattle, or is it more of a suburby kind of feel? It feels quite suburban,
Well, Seattle has really big neighborhoods.
right?
It's definitely an urban center. It's a big sprawling city, but
Okay.
it's pocketed with these big neighborhoods, and so then you end up with these little pocketed, they feel kind of like small towns within the city. And so we're in one of those. Ballard is the neighborhood. But there's its own little it's traditionally a pretty blue collar uh you know, fishing community, commercial fishing. So there's lots of big, you know, fishing boats, and we've
Oh,
got
really?
the
Wow.
most trafficked drawbridge um in Seattle. And I know we have a lot of drawbridges. So it's a nice spot. We're close to the water, you know, we're close to the city. Um, and yeah, a lot of good food, a lot of good drinks, which can be a problem at times. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's a cool place. Seattle's a beautiful place. For anyone, yeah, listening to this, and for you too,
Yeah.
I would always say visit in the summer or the fall, but just kind of avoid the rest of the year if you want
Okay.
to see it at its best, I suppose.
And it looks like quite a small team and nurturing new talent and things like that. When you look back on your sort of old career, is there something that someone might have said to you as you're sort of going through the junior to running your own studio? Hats off to you. It's never the easiest thing, but it's always probably the most rewarding thing when you're your own boss and you're making the decisions rather than being sort of told what to do all the time. Um, is there anything that you kind of pass on or you look back on and think that was a key moment that you kind of hold on to as a bit of insight?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Well, I would say the thing that I want to pass on
Mm,
more, and I don't always, it's difficult for me as the type of person we've established me as, um, is I think a lot of, young designers, and I found myself in the same kind of position when I was founding the studio and earlier on in my career, is it's really hard to be patient and sort of sit in the moment and learn where you can. And, I think for ambitious people, you kind of never have enough and you're sort of constantly pushing and distracting yourself with the thing that you want and not focusing on the thing that is in front of you. And that's, that's true in that's true in most of life. But I think for creatives and for creative people, we sort of aspire, and I think that can be a very good thing if it's channeled in the right way, but can very much be a distraction and a hindrance to your progress. And the younger designers that have been very successful in and around Parker have been quite a bit more patient. They have aspirations, but they know how to channel what they're good at in the moment for the highest impact in the project. And I certainly, didn't have that skill as a young designer, and I can see it so clearly at this point where I can see the difference. If you took me at 22 and plopped me into Parker as a junior designer, I don't know if I'd be successful. I don't know if I'd be the right fit. I think I would be too eager for what's next and not patient enough for the thing, working on the thing that is important but might take time and is less creatively fulfilling perhaps, or feels tedious. And so I think that perspective, which was kind of put on me from a leader that I had worked for 10 years prior to starting a studio, and he would always say, I can't remember exactly how he said it, so I'm paraphrasing, but it was just about slowing down. And I tend to get really excited and passionate and go fast. And I think his advice of, you can't you can't make good strategic decisions on your next steps for yourself or for your projects or your clients if you're going faster than you can manage. Your brain can kind of keep up with. So while that's not something that I think I was able to put in practice as a young designer, it's very obvious to me how much that would have benefited, myself when I
sure.
look back. And I think I'd really love to try and do what I can to reinforce that with young designers. I love to work with young designers, cultivate their skills and build them up, challenge them. Uh, it's certainly one of the more fulfilling, aspects of being a leader of a small team.
Sure.
Um, I would
And
say that's kind of it. Yeah,
yeah,
be
I,
patient, man.
just taking time. And I always remember the first podcast I did with Paul from Studio Blackburn.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you listened to any of them, but his advice was from his, I think, creative director, Adrian Caddy. Is like, let the world turn. And I always thought that's such a nice expression. If something goes wrong, just let the world turn and then come back to it. So I think we can be rather reactive, right? As creatives, it's like, even in meetings, if someone's got something, you kind of want to sketch it and show them and go, oh, you could do this, but it's like, just let it, just hold off, let it
Yeah,
take for a bit. We're terrible.
we're terrible, and we're, and I think there's a lot of creatives in our specific niche that are very analytical and sort of lean more into the maybe emotion is less of a part of it. But there are, I know there are so many, creatives like myself that come from, yeah, these other avenues into this thing, and they carry passion and emotion that that drives a sense of urgency and can be a huge hindrance um, if it's not, and I don't want to say tamed, but if it's not wrangled, let the world turn. I love that. It's
Yeah,
true.
it's a good one. I often use it when I get into, if something slightly goes off the rails, which we know it always does. It's never as smooth as anyone thinks. I always
Of
often
course.
just say that and go, "That's it." Um, I mean, I'm just looking at the folio. You got the work is stunning, right? I think that you got
Thank you.
some beautiful work, and thanks so much for reaching out to me because honestly, is one of those things. I feature very much European based, and seeing your work. I'm just looking at the film and architecture case study and in your news, and it's just what's lovely is that certain studios have a certain feel to it and almost what you
Hmm.
call house styles. But I'm just looking across the work, and there's like a really nice sort of fluid connection, but it feels really different. And that's really hard, I think, as a studio, keep on doing without falling back into that. Oh, well, let's just take that approach we did for such and such and
Mm.
bring that in there.
Yeah.
It's a discipline, I think, as creatives. You can't always just fall back on something you might have done previously for a client and that you go, actually, that could maybe fit. Or I just wanted to get your
Hmm.
take on that and try and find out how you create such a diverse portfolio.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. We do, all of us that have worked here, and we do put so much into these. It's always nice to hear that it resonates and feels interesting to people in our field and to our peers. Of course, like we love to look at everyone else's work and are inspired and motivated by how talented we see, all the talent we see around the world. But to speak to this, I would first say there's certainly a pro to either side, to having a house style or to kind of going the way that I think we've gone a little bit more so, where um, the result and the creative is very much unique to the project. And I would say the pro to going more consistent is you're selling something that's a little more, the buyer knows what they're getting. You attract a smaller pool that is more apt to close a contract with you. Um, and so, I think the reason that we've never been on that side of the studio spectrum isn't out of, I suppose, lack of direction or clarity, more so. And this has become a little bit more clear to me, honestly, in the last 6 months, as I've been spending a lot of time trying to understand what's unique about the studio and who's come and gone, and what has really made it something that I think has been able to produce some good work that is very different. And it's the reason that I challenged myself with that is for the buyer at the end of the day. We get into these conversations of, hey, I haven't seen you do this type of thing. I see all this beautiful work, which I enjoy, but hey, we're making a developer tool that needs to be this way, or we imagine being this way, or some type of experience that or product that might not necessarily be well represented in our portfolio. And I've been unpacking why we've won certain projects that we've won and why we've lost others that we've lost. And it really comes down to, and why I think the portfolio is the way it is, to answer your question, is we really put, or I do anyway, and the team as well, like we really put at the center of what we're solving and what the result should be. We look at that through a lens of empathy for the end user first. And there's a business case to be made for that. If you are attracting, of course, the consumer in the right way, then your client is selling, or whatever it is they need to do, and they're finding success. But I think that's why one brand of ours might feel a little more feminine and light and beautiful and kind of serene, and another might feel a little more American Midwest, mid-century industrial. It can be a little bit more rangy, or like Feldman, as you brought up,
Yeah.
very simple, almost like a non-brand within a
Yeah.
beautiful experience. But the reason for that is just what do we need to do? Who's the end user for them, and who's their buyer? and being really empathetic to their needs and letting that dictate, which is one, creatively fun because you're dipping into all these different things, trying new things constantly, and sometimes maybe feeling like you might have pitched an idea that you're in over your head and you've got to figure out now how to do this thing that might require new skills or whatever. So it keeps it interesting. But that's I think why the portfolio is the way it is. And I think as I'm wrestling with that vernacular and that story, it's really in an effort to be more clear as to why it is that way. Say you're a client. It doesn't matter to me if you're trying to sell something for people to eat or to wear or to an experience for them to enjoy. We want to be empathetic to what that need is and bring something that communicates to them and resonates with them. So it's just simple as that. But there are studios out there doing that, of course, like I would say better than us in a lot of capacities. And, I think it's a mystery sometimes as to why that works and why it doesn't.
And I was going to just ask you about, and I think it's interesting for graduates, where does the work come from? Is it the reputation you built? I know, 99% of it usually is the reputation, right? Because I'm just looking at the Habits project, is that a direct conversation or is that an introduction through someone else? So that's a very nice one too.
Thank you. Yeah, that one, I would say we all know the region in the Middle East right now is certainly growing and is booming, and there's a lot of opportunity there. We see people moving there and starting businesses there. We ended up doing quite a bit of work in that region back in 2018 when we were doing hospitality, when I was talking to you about the kind of the first iteration of Parker.
Yeah.
We opened a burger joint, a pretty high-end restaurant, a bakery, in Kuwait, Saudi. Where else? Can't quite remember actually. It feels like so long ago. But that's kind of how we got introduced to that market, and they're very they're lovely people. They're very loyal. They are very communicative and share with each other. They're committed to doing things very well. It's an amazing place to do creative work, and it's just word of mouth over there in that industry. So Habits was in Saudi, and it was a fun challenge of introducing something that over here in Western Europe and the US, we're so inundated with supplement brands and wellness things and gummies and pills and all these things. We're used to it. But this was a bit of a different challenge where, their founder came to us, again, word of mouth over there. And it was very much about, hey, like we want to introduce this to this market, but they're skeptical. And the only experience this market has with it is very pharmaceutical medicine. It's not lifestyle oriented. It's not brand forward. And we want to change that. We want to do something more interesting there. So very fun. And so for that particular project, it was very much about how can you maintain some sort of scientific rigor and trust with that audience who's expecting something a little more medicinal and pharmaceutical, but then twist it just enough in a way that feels a little more lifestyle. And, you do simple things like bring in color, and you do simple things like bring in common speak descriptors as to what the supplement is. Yeah, it was a simple project, but one that was, again, I think a fun opportunity to be empathetic to that user, where if it was another US supplement brand, we would approach it very differently, of course. So that one was a great time.
I'm going to jump back because I've been making notes as I go along. Back to the music stuff, because I think piano is quite mathematical, right? You can have a mathematical brain and play without the emotion, or to your point, be the more emotive kind of. I think some of the great players, as my dad always used to say, some of the great jazz players never really had lessons. They just felt and that was it, and they had the feeling. Do you still play anything? Thinking about your kids?
I do.
Stuff. Okay, what do you do?
I do, yeah. I mean, our house is full of instruments. There's you're stepping on xylophones, and we've got ukuleles and guitars. I've got like 4 guitars. We've got a little tiny keyboard for my 4-year-old, and then a bigger keyboard that my 7-year-old and I play with a little more. And we have when they were babies, there were tambourines and maracas everywhere and all kinds of fun things. Um, so yeah, we definitely have a lot of dance parties and with my girls, yeah, at our house, and we very much love it. I play them to sleep very often with my guitar, rather than read a book. They'll just get in bed and
Yeah.
I'll just kind of finger pick away for a little while until I hear them quiet, and then I'll leave. So we play a lot of music. Actually, product plug. There's this new brand called Orangewood guitars, and
Okay.
they make these. They're rather inexpensive, and they make this one guitar that has, the bridge of the guitar is what holds the strings
Yeah. Yeah.
suspended down at the bottom, by where your right hand would be. And it's a rubber bridge, so it has this really muted, kind of thumpy, twangy tone, like on the high end
Okay.
strings. But it's a fun guitar, great guitar to have if you've got kids around, because it sounds good, it's smaller, and you don't stress out so much if it gets knocked over. It's not your $3,000 guitar you're trying to protect. So yeah, we do a lot of music. That's actually one thing too that I think has been fun for us to be experimenting with, is with sonic identity and these brands too. Is
Hmm.
you know both myself and one of our designers were kind of like, should we just do a sonic identity for this pro bono, just as an experiment for ourselves? Like, we have some synthesizers and some teenage engineering products and these instruments. Should we let it rip? But yeah, we're very much into that, and I think looking for an opportunity to bring it into work is something that obviously would be awesome. But going back to your original point of music can be very mathematical or uh, very visceral and emotional, I certainly fall in the latter.
Yeah. And I suppose that,
A
I'm
lot of
just,
Nils Fromm
yeah.
and Peter Broderick, and these composers, these contemporary composers. I mean, they're highlighting the emotion, but are also technically incredible and are on they span both sides of that spectrum. And that's the way that I always played music. Know the basics, but I would just sort of feel it out. It would be like sometimes even blindly playing on the piano, just kind of looking for sounds and things that felt interesting. Or I might hear a sound and I don't even know what I'm playing necessarily, but I know what the next one should be. So I'll
Right.
find that, and then keep going and come up with these kind of moody and more ethereal sounding things. And I loved to do that. I used to be able to, at my university, we had these practice spaces in our music department, and they were, this is common for music departments, but there would be a piano in each of these rooms, and they were all semi soundproof. And you just go in, and you had this like little room with a nice sounding piano, and I just turned the light off, and just sit there, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd have my phone recording, you know, and I'd just kind of see if anything happened. And I do think back on that sometimes, and I think about the way I like to approach the early stages of developing these brands. And there's a strong emotional component to it. Jules, who does a lot of the strategy for us, she can toe into all the math and the analytics and the things, and her and I interface quite a bit. But to be able to take that and then, for lack of a better metaphor, turn the lights off and just kind of play the piano and look for something that feels emotionally resonant with who we now know is who we're bringing this brand to,
Mhm.
is such a fun exercise. And we do that, of course, as most studios and creatives do, with pulls of imagery and typography and color and sometimes music as well, and bring them into these visual territories. And they're very emotive. Sometimes they're more literal, but challenging our clients to think that way as well is something that I find a lot of joy in. They tend to like it more than they think they're going to. They want a formula to tell me how I can sell this, and then you still do, but then you also say, hey, come along the more emotional side of it here, and let's
Yeah.
think about how we can resonate with your end consumer, and it feels this way. And then there's always a fun moment where that kind of clicks for them, and it's like everyone gets really excited, and morale kind of
Yeah.
busts through the ceiling, and then onward through the rest of the project we go.
I agree. I always think it's really interesting if you're working on something, and obviously motion is key to everything we do now. That's the way forward. But you do something, and you put a little track on it, right? You just put something on there, and you watch it without it, then you just press play with it, and then straight away that emotional pull. It's so seductive, isn't it? You're kind of in this.
Yes.
We're now in this world. Going back to sonic branding and the music, I think it's super, super important. And I always, because I play guitar, got far too many for my liking. Yeah, but I always think it's interesting.
It's kind of addicting, isn't it? Right?
Oh yeah, right. It's
Yeah.
addictive and expensive. Then you let them go, and they're even worth more than you let them go for. That's the one that keeps on getting to me. I'm like, oh man, I should have got that one. But I think of design a bit like music, right? You got like an octave, and you think about all the different genres and everything that comes out from music, and it's literally an octave. And that blows my mind, thinking that it's nothing. There's nothing kind of new. The notes are the notes, right? But it's the interpretation and I suppose going back to that thing of an expression of music through design or whatever it is. Design has that as well. It can be uplifting.
Yeah.
It can be really, just kind of on a plain level mood. The color, I think it's fascinating. There's got to be some sort of science out there to it somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. You got an octave in music, and then in graphic design, you've got shape, color, words, type, and all the things that we can make, motion, all the things that you can do out of that is amazing. And this is an interesting overlap.
Yeah, I went to a design talk years ago with Dear Studio. Everything clicked because he's a really wonderful jazz pianist, and how and that idea of the fluidity in it, and it's like, you just kind of, what you're playing is what you're doing with type on screen. And I was like, oh man, I'm so jealous, because he's a great player. He's such a good player. I think he's got it.
Yeah, I too envy those skills. I wish that I could sit at a piano and play jazz or something. Sometimes I play jazz by accident, but they're really just kind of messy, gross chords. I think something that you touched on a second ago that I thought was interesting, and kind of back to this emotion and the sonic identity aspect to it, is another huge inspiration that I'd be curious if more, creatives and designers really also share, is I loved film soundtracks and scores. Like, you think about the power that, that music has in a film is also as monumental, I would say, as the, the talent of the actor in some capacity. And that was another big thing for me as well. So I think one reason why I think the sonic identity side of brands feels so of interest to me is I think there's a lot to be tapped into there, and music is becoming more accessible too. Big sort of the age of big recording studios and needing to rent time and all this stuff is kind of on the way out, if not gone already. And so many big artists now are recording in their bedroom. The technology has gotten to the point where you can make an album of enough quality to where it's indiscerning to the listener, and you can do it for in your bedroom. So I think the opportunity to do something there feels really interesting.
Yeah, just going back to soundtracks, I remember, probably about 95, so I would have graduated in 1994. It's probably about a year into it, or a couple of months into being a designer. On the big old beige Macs, we're not talking about these fancy things, with a little CD drive, a PowerPC CD drive. A friend of mine at the time had a Vangelis Blade Runner soundtrack. He just went, put that on design. This, like, you're in this world.
Oh yeah,
just you and a screen, and next thing you know, it's finished.
Oh yeah,
I don't even know what I've done. What have I actually done? I've done something, but it's okay. And I did. It was not a pitch. It was the project, and the three of us are working on it. And I went with my design, and after I think back to it, it's like a black with these sort of vector lines, then a fisheye lens. This is like basic. Would have taken about 2 hours to actually render it back in Photoshop. And I
Oh
just looked
wow.
at that and I was like, oh my God, that is a connection probably to the music on the planes. And there's this, I've got it
Oh yeah.
downstairs. It's my first ever bit of print that I ever did. And I was
Oh,
amazed
that's
they went
cool.
for it. It's great. It's on the
That's a
front
great
cover.
story.
Yeah, I just made
That is, I mean, I share that as well. There are times I'll say I'm working on something that needs to be more emotionally resonant. I'll put on a film soundtrack late at night, like while I'm working on it, or if it needs to be something else. Like it is interesting to experiment with the music you're listening to as it relates to the thing you're trying to communicate, and letting that kind of take over a little bit. Late at night, lights are low, kids are asleep. Honestly, that is the most creatively productive time I have. Is probably
yeah,
from is probably from 8 p.m. to midnight.
yeah.
So it fights against my good health, but it's a fun time to be creative for
It's
me
good for
anyway.
it's your mental health because you're losing yourself into
There
it,
we
aren't
go.
you? So there's always
Exactly.
there's
Yes.
always a positive for doing what we love, right? And I think
Hmm.
everyone who's doing it is super lucky, and we've been doing it for a long time, and it's great to carry on doing it. Really, I was going to
Yes.
touch on AI, and not as a celebration or criticism or anything like that, but as a studio, is that something you tap into or not? I'm
Oh,
just
yeah,
interested.
yeah. I mean, the topic of the day for sure, and definitely something that, yeah, I mean, the more we're all sharing our perspectives and ideas, the more we can kind of hive mind what we think it should be used for. And I think for us, I'm happy to just sort of share all my thoughts on it. I think it has, obviously it has the power to change things very fast and in ways that we can't quite comprehend yet. But I think what's more important in the moment is a little bit of going back to letting the world turn. I'm not going to figure out the perfect way to use AI this week
Yeah.
or this year, even, because it's going to change faster than I can probably keep up with it. But the mindset of being open to adapting is kind of the place that I've found myself. And I think everyone on our team has kind of landed in a similar zone where there is a skepticism to it. There is an opportunistic perspective on it. There is a fear of it a little
Hmm.
bit, that we share all these things. But I think the adapting, the need for us as a small team in particular is in the repetition and is in the time spent finding something that we need to reference, or refining an abstract idea in words for a presentation. Those
Hmm.
moments where, gosh man, I can spend an hour on this. Don't
Yes,
have an hour.
it was.
I would say yeah, I would say it's improved it's improved the our ability to sharpen things up, I think, a little quicker. We're certainly not relying on it for the creative. It's fun to experiment with, but being able to find something much quicker in perplexity is amazing. Being able to ingest a bunch of dense PDFs from a client into something like Claude and say, hey, help me unpack the main things that we should cover from my perspective as someone who is advising on the brand. Uh, and sure, it's not going to give me all the answers, and we think for ourselves, but those moments of efficiency and getting some of that time back is the thing that I think we feel the most optimistic for, because the few hours time back can be used either to take a break,
Mm.
which is something that we often struggle to do as creatives, or it's a little bit more time to spend thinking about bigger picture narrative, or on a particular logo or word mark or something that we want a little more time on. And we're getting some of that time back now with AI. And I'm finding that as a net positive for us. Um, we certainly still are bringing in copywriters. We're certainly still bringing in illustrators.
Mhm.
But to iterate on a style and communicate it to a client, you know, uh, it can be very helpful. um, you've experienced this, I'm sure, as well, where it's like, hey, we want to communicate your brand with this kind of illustration language, and you're asking your client to think very abstractly because you're showing them an image of a woman holding an orange, but you're talking about a developer's piece of developer software that you're branding, and they're like, I don't, it's too abstract for them. So to be able to take that and say, represent something in this style of this, to be able to show that to them and say, we want you to work with this illustrator, has also helped us move that conversation along quicker. So for us, it's about efficiency. It's not about it replacing the creativity or doing the work.
Yeah, no, yeah, it does.
Yeah,
It does.
and so we'll see what it looks like 6 months from now. Who knows?
It'll be doing all the work.
Yeah,
I'll be saying and using it on the podcast to filter out any background stuff. So it's there, right? It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
So, and it does really, really help. Well, we've spoke for nearly an hour.
Look at us.
How
we're really doing it.
We are. I know. I never set a time limit on these things. I don't know how it's going to go, but it's been brilliant, and it's finally nice to actually, put a face to the name and the studio. And
yeah,
honestly, congratulate you on the work. It's great. It's got a really beautiful. It feels global, right? And I think that's what's lovely.
Yeah.
I've just seen you've won an ISTD award as well. So there you go.
Yeah. We ended up for our typeface, PS Times.
So is that a self-initiated thing? Pretty.
It was, yeah. Oh. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great segue to that. Yeah, we only have one weight. We bit off a little more than we could chew. Jesse Amborn, should be a very prominent figure in design, but is very recluse in his self-marketing. So he's, by way of, Parker, he's influenced a lot of the work and been a part of a lot of that. But when we were reimagining our website, this is 2021, it was a combination of some classics. It was like, let's take a Times cut and chalet and do something that's going to feel great now and ideally great in 10 years. Let's just do something without trying to over stylize this thing. But we were using Times Now, and it's just very rhythmically clunky and not great as a display, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So Jesse was like, "Why not? I'm just gonna redesign. I'm just gonna work on redesigning it." So like, okay, and he sort of dug into it, and we went back and forth a few times, and sort of brainstormed what it could be, and yeah, out came PS Times. We replaced it on our site. We put up the store. And yeah, we sell it through there, and we do sell a good amount of it. It's certainly, it helps pay the rent a little bit, which is nice. But it's a beautiful typeface, and Jesse did an amazing job. And we would like to do more. We'd like to do an italic. We'd like to do a text. Okay. And yeah, it was a fun experiment. And then yeah, we ended up winning this award for it. So I was like, it must be decent.
Well, I'm literally now at your store. I'm going to keep the credit card away from it. Yeah. Talk to me about this limited edition box, the Office Air Seasoning. So is this just self-initiated?
Yeah, it was a bit of a lofty idea. This was 2022. It was our end of the year client gift. We went pretty big that year. We had a little, from a business standpoint, we had a little cash to get rid of for tax purposes. And I was like, let's just do something fun with it,
Yeah.
So we worked with, one of the best printers in the world, and we worked with a cool candle manufacturer and to do a custom little concrete ceramic.
Yeah, I love it.
Combo. Yeah. And yeah, designed the box, and so we gave it to clients at the end of the year. It was like we sent it all over, and then we had a bunch. So we put it on the store, and we don't have any anymore, sadly. And it's probably not even marked sold out. So I need to change that. We have a few. Maybe I'll send you one.
Lovely.
And yeah, it's just a beautiful box. It's a candle that we worked the scent out on, and that was it. It was just an experiment, an excuse to do something fun.
Yeah, but it's nice to do that within the studio, right? Just to break away and have your own client, creative freedom, just go for it and see what comes from it.
Yeah, and it's sometimes paralyzing to do that because you think of all the ideas and have no direction. So it can quickly be the most challenging thing. But yeah, so we erred on the side of simplicity.
But it's great.
Yeah, so that's that.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks for taking the time.
David, thank you.
No, pleasure.
Yeah, it was great to meet, and I appreciate you having me on.
Likewise.
Yeah, we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Okay, cheers.
Take care. Bye, Todd.